Hello and welcome to this new video. So we will be starting a series on opening principles. So you have them right in front of you. So the opening principles are as follows. So firstly, we have to get a lead in development. This is the first and most important aspect of the opening. Also, we have to fight in the center. It's important to understand its significance as well. We will be talking about that. Do not make unnecessary pawn moves if you have not completed your development. So what this means is don't waste your time, or otherwise don't waste your moves on the pawn moves, because then you will not have as many pieces developed. Don't develop the queen too early. Well, this also ties into not wasting time which you could use for development. Do not move the same piece twice. And also, the unprepared attack is a very common thing. When we're attacking without developing any pieces, such attacks are usually doomed to fail. So in this first video, we will be talking about how to use an advantage in development, and hopefully you enjoy. So here we have a game by Mikhail Tal against Wolfgang Ullmann, and let's see what happens. So it started as the French. We have this variation of the French defense, and already White is developing very quickly. Notice how he is moving around every single piece only once for now, and putting them on the most aggressive squares available, apart from the knight, which could have gone to c3. Here black makes a small mistake, which is d takes e4. And the reason this is a mistake is because it gives up the center, because now white will have the d pawn against the e pawn, and also it allows white to continue developing. So now white recaptures, and even though white has moved the same knight twice, he has not really lost any time, and now his knight is in a very good position. So already there are some clouds around black's position, as he has one piece developed against three of white's. So black continues development, and here it's a very instructive moment for white. You can think about what Tal played, and here he played the move bishop g5. And it seems quite simple, barbaric, to just attack the opponent's queen. But the point is, not only are we developing the bishop to a square where it will clearly be better, but also we are developing with tempo. Again, the whole point is to get a lead in development, which means to develop our pieces and not allow the opponent to develop their pieces. So this is possible because now we have attacked the queen, so the opponent can't just simply develop. For example, already there are some ways to get bad positions. For example, the simple bishop e7 would run into this check, and this is a pin, so the king would have to move, and it's clear that black is in big trouble. Similar to knight e7, if knight f6, then at least white can double the pawns, and the king will not be very safe. So here black has to move the queen, he moves with tempo. Now this is a fork, so white's move is forced, knight c3. And now black's position is a little bit critical, but he is fine. He should play here a6. Of course, it doesn't develop any pieces, but it resolves the tension around the queen side and the center. And for example, after bishop c6, since there's a threat of taking here with some ideas to take the bishop on g5, white doesn't have time for example, to castle. So for example, d5 would make sense, ed castles, and here white's lead in development is huge, but black is fine because he has this move f6, putting his king on f7, for example, like this. And for example, after these complications, black has a very difficult defense with the move c4, and the queen can come back to defend. Of course, none of this is very obvious, but this just speaks to the level of problems that black already has if he has to find something like this. Instead, what he does is takes on d4, and unfortunately, again similarly to taking on e4, this just allows white's pieces into the game, and now not only has white a huge lead in development, which is 4 pieces against currently 2, as the queen is not really developed, it's more in the way, but Also, white is closer to castling kingside or queenside as well, and black is in a little bit of trouble. Still, he can survive, for example, with bishop e7, but after something like h4 to take back with the g pawn, with the h pawn, and open up the h file, black still hasn't gotten easy development. Instead, bishop b4 was played, which makes sense to pin the knight and try to win a pawn, but unfortunately this is too slow, and now white finds the best move, which is also very instructive, which is to just castle, not caring about this pawn on c3, because pawns are only important in the late middle game and endgame. At this point, if black wins this pawn, which he does, it will not be really sufficient counterplay for the lack of development. If we think about it in another way, even though here black is a pawn ahead, he is actually 2 rooks down, because white's rooks have easy development while black's rooks are still in the corner. So this position occurred, and perhaps Tal's opponent didn't see any problems with this. And admittedly, the move that Tal played is not very easy. He played here the brilliant sacrifice, which is knight f5. And again, this is only possible because of white's lead in development. If black had at least a knight developed somewhere, this would probably not work, as the king would be able to run away, the knight would be able to participate in defense. But as is, at the moment white is playing with a lot more pieces on the board than black, so he can afford to give one up with the aim to give up to open up the e file. Of course, black has to take the knight, otherwise it's jumping around everywhere. So he takes rook e1. Now bishop e6 is forced, otherwise, for example, this will be end badly, or taking the bishop as well, of course. This will not end well as well because of taking everything. And so bishop e6, and now queen d6, a very nice move. There's no very direct threat, I don't think, but white is threatening rook a d1, and then queen d8, which would end in checkmate. And surprisingly, even though it's black to move, he cannot really do much. For example, developing the knight turns into checkmate due to this pin. Developing the knight here also doesn't look great. For example, after rook a d1, white will soon capture on e6, and the problems will never end. So black plays a6, and now white finds a nice way to win. He doesn't react to the attacked bishop. He notices a pattern of checking on f8, so he goes bishop d2, black takes, and bishop b4, keeping the bishop here to pin the knight. And here black doesn't really have a defense against all of the threats. He takes the bishop, and it's quite symbolic that black at the moment has 8 material points as an advantage. But if we look at the position here, white is playing with 2 rooks and a bishop and a queen, which is about 22 points, while black is only playing with a bishop, knight, and queen. So here also white took the rook. These pieces cannot develop, and even though black is up a lot of material here, he has 2 knights and 2 pawns for a rook. Black resigned, as the position is hopeless. Next moves are rook a1, bishop a5, bishop d6 is an idea as well. If after rook a1 the queen moves, queen d8 is also checkmate. So there are plenty of ways to win here. And this was a very quick and nice game by Tal, basically only using his lead in development, sensing the moment before the opponent can develop the rest of the pieces, and giving up a pawn just to open up some files, also a knight as well. So the next game is also quite interesting, also quite similar to the first one. Also this is Tal playing against a strong grandmaster, e4, c5, and here this time we have the Najdorf, well, not the Najdorf, this is the Scheveningen Sicilian. Here white plays f4. Nowadays People play g4 here since the bishop has been closed, and this is considered quite dangerous. But f4 of course makes sense. So white is going for some kingside activity. a6. So black keeps moving pawns. Of course, this is kind of still possible, and it is of course theory, but we have to keep in mind the dangers of moving pawns so much in the opening. So bishop e3, white keeps developing, and here black plays knight bd7, and this is not a very good move because white will be able to defend the pawn on e4, and instead black should have considered developing the queenside bishop while also threatening b4 to try to win the weakened e4 pawn. For example, queen f3, bishop b7, and only now knight bd7. Here the bishop is passive on d3, and black is in time to get counterplay. So what happens is knight bd7, g4. So white is already attacking. Of course, he is pushing a lot of pawns, but he is not pushing them without reason. And there are quite serious threats of g5, after which the knight would have to go back to f6. So now white has developed with tempo, which means black has to react to the threat. He plays knight d to c5, moving the knight again, with the point of allowing the other knight to go to d7. Queen f3, white develops another piece and is aiming to probably castle queenside, while also defending the pawn on e4. Here queen c7 was played, but here the queen on c7 will not be the most important piece. Here black should have played b5 again, with the point to put his bishop on b7 and gain counterplay as soon as possible. For example, g5, knight goes back to f to d7, next moves will be bishop e7 and b4, if not then rook c8, and black does have counterplay. Instead queen c7, now g5, knight d7, and now white plays a nice move, which is a4, which stops black's ideas of b5, and it also has a pretty sneaky threat of b4, which would trap the knight. So again, black cannot just do anything, he has to react to the threat, which means he doesn't have time to complete his development. So here b6 was played, and the black gives himself the square on b7 for the knight, and here bishop to h3 was played, developing another piece. The g2 diagonal would not be very good since the bishop can always go to b7. Here Tal is putting pressure on the e6 square, which means he might be going for f5 or simply to sacrifice something on e6, and also a typical idea is at some point to play g6 at the moment where black would have to recapture with the f pawn. So bishop b7, and now white plays castles. At the moment b4 was not an issue because of knight to d3, and now this knight on c3 is hanging. So white plays castles, and now b4 is a more serious threat as the knight would not hang with check, and also white's next move might be the simple rook a to d1, strengthening his position, so black is in quite big trouble. Now, for example, if bishop e7, then of course b4, black is losing a piece most likely. Also, if a5, for example, to stop b4, then this really weakens this square. Knight b8 is an option, but of course such moves can never end well, and in general there's not much for black to do. Of course he can survive, but not with knight e4, which was played, so black decides on a desperate sacrifice, and this might work out if he had more pieces developed, but unfortunately this simply doesn't work, and again Tal uses his lead in development to win the tactical battle in the center, which would otherwise maybe give black some kind of chances. So white takes back and black plays knight c5. So this is the point. I'm using the pin on the knight, and if it was black to move, he would take this knight and have a pawn advantage and also a pretty safe position. But here white had calculated it correctly, and he plays knight takes e6 with the point if white takes back, if black takes back like this, he will take on c5, getting rid of black's active pieces, and then take on e6. And this position is simply hopeless for black. The next moves are rook a to e1, and white is not even down material, he is up a pawn, so black can safely resign here, as his king will forever be stuck in the center. Instead, black takes with the knight. Now material is equal, but the center is opening up, and now we can see why it was useful to develop the pieces and why black should have been faster with his own development. f5. We have a lead in development with 1, 2, 3, 4 against, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and soon 7 against the knight, the queen, and the bishop, which makes it a big lead. Notice how I mentioned the king, because castling is a move that develops two pieces at once. Of course, developing the king might not seem important in the opening, but putting the king in the corner safely is also a form of development, as that's where we want it to go. So that's why it's very important to castle, because it develops two pieces at the same time. So now knight c5 happens, white gets rid of the bishop, and black takes back, and f6. So this sheds in black's bishop and also prevents black from castling queenside. And so the position is very bad for black. Let's see how it ended. g6. Now another piece has come into the game, and black's position is desperate. c4 was played, rook f to e1. Even though the position is open, white is in no hurry to checkmate his opponent. He is putting all of his pieces in the center, and even though black kind of has time to develop, now he doesn't have the ability to develop, since all of his pieces are now stuck. King d8, and now of course a tactic happens. Inevitably in such positions some kind of big tactic should happen, and white takes on d6, sacrificing his queen. Of course black cannot really take it, as this is checkmate, this is also checkmate, and this is also checkmate. So black takes this knight, white takes, and here black is an exchange up, but his king is still stuck. Even though he has two rooks, they are basically useless. White is up material in a way. Rook b8, queen f7, picking up this pawn to create a passed pawn here. Black gets some kind of activity, but it's not really much. Also, black of course doesn't have any perpetuals, as always the bishop can come back to defend on the light squared diagonal. So rook b2, queen g7, attacking the rook, and there's not really much to do about the attacked rook. For example, if here, then the simple move queen e7 will win a rook and get a winning endgame. Otherwise, rook e8 is possible, but we can just take and promote with check. Otherwise, rook c2 was played, white took the rook, gave some checks, and after rook e6 he also wins the queen, and the game is over. Black resigned, and we can understand why. So these are a few games where Tao used his lead in development quite effectively, and notice the build-up to the tactics. He was always developing his pieces sensibly and not wasting time. So this is basically how we're going to try to use our lead in development, which we will hopefully get by abiding by the opening principles, about which we will learn more in the upcoming videos. So thanks for watching, subscribe, and see you next time.